So in summary, what we said last week is on the Linux operating system, also you can do the same approach in a database. If you're creating a database for some website where you have thousands of users that register, they need to provide a username and password. You don't store the password in the database, you store a hash of the password. So that if some malicious user gets access to your database, they don't immediately have access to all your users' passwords. Okay? That's a significant privacy concern nowadays, because if someone hacks into some website and gets access to 10,000 users' passwords, they can potentially use those passwords to access other accounts. That's a problem, because many people reuse their passwords. So store a hash of the password, but we introduced this new concept called a salt. This extra value that we use, which is really just a random value chosen by the system, and we don't, so what we do is take this random value, the salt, concatenate it with a password and take a hash of those two together. This salt is publicly known. That is, it's stored in the database. In our Linux operating system, we have a file under the etc directory, the shadow file, and that file stores the username, the algorithm used for the hash. For example, an algorithm or an identifier for SHA, so the algorithm is identified. The salt is listed here. So if a malicious user gets access to this database, they can see the salt value. And a hash of the password combined with the salt. It says hash password here, but it's actually a hash of the password combined with the salt. So even though the salt is known, this gives us some benefits. What are those benefits? If the salt was secret, if it was not known by a malicious user, it gives us a benefit of effectively increasing the length of the password. I choose a 10-character password. The salt is another 6 characters. Effectively, my password is increased up to 16 characters if the salt was secret. But even if the salt is public, that is, it's stored in the database, it has some benefits. The one we mentioned last week, which is a minor benefit, is that if we use a salt, 2 users with the same password, if we don't use a salt, 2 users with the same password will have the same hash value. If you see the database, if I'm the administrator of the system and I see the database of all the hash values, and it turns out someone has the same password as me, I love CSS322, then the hash value will be the same, and just by seeing the same hash value I know you have the same password and I've discovered your password. That's a minor benefit, because using a salt, even though the passwords are the same, the salt values are different. So the hash values are different, and I cannot see if someone has the same password as me because the hash values are different. That's a minor benefit of using a salt. Another significant benefit, which we'll go through with an example, is that a normal attack on hash values of passwords, when a salt's not used, a practical attack is to make use of pre-computed hash values to make the attack faster in terms of a brute force attack. Let's try and explain that. An attack that a malicious user can do, given that they have discovered the set of passwords, of the hash values of passwords. If the salt is not used, let's see what an attacker can do to do a brute force attack. And I'll use some numbers to make our calculations easy. Let's say the password that everyone chooses is a 10-character password, and those characters of the password are lowercase letters and numbers, 0 to 9. So if we have a 10-character password, where those characters can be from A to Z in lowercase and from 0 to 9, then we can have 36 possible characters, 26 letters plus 10 numbers. So when I choose my password, if it's 10 characters in length, any of those 10 characters can be one of 36 values. So the total possible number of passwords is, I have 10 characters. One character can be one of 36 values.
36 to the 10.
So the first character I choose for my password, I choose from 36. The second, I choose from 36. The 10th, I choose from 36 possible values. I have 36 to the power of 10 possible passwords to choose from, assuming you just randomly choose a password. Of course, in practice, we may not randomly choose a password, but let's assume so, which is about 36 to the power of 10. I've got that somewhere. Is about 3 by 10 to the power of 15. Okay? So that's how many possible passwords. Let's do, as an attacker, a brute force attack. That is, if I know the hash value, so I know some hash values because I've accessed the database, I want to find the passwords of the users. A brute force attack is to try all possible passwords, take a hash of them, and compare. That is, I know some hash values. They were stored in the database of our Linux operating system or in our web database that the malicious user has somehow gained access to. The malicious user knows some hash values, knows the usernames. The malicious user wants to know the corresponding passwords. And depending upon how many users we have in the system, there are multiple hash values known. They don't know the password. To find the password, they're going to try every possible password. Instead of using these subscripts, I may try something different. Sorry if you've written that, because I'll use the subscripts. A, B, and C. The idea of our 3 by 10 to the 15 possible passwords, a brute force attack, take password 1. We're not using a salt. Calculate the hash of password 1. Get some value, H1. If it matches HA, then we know the password of user A is P1. Try P2. Take the hash of P2. Get H2. If this hash value matches 1 in the database of users, then we've found the password for that user. And we keep trying for all the possible passwords. A brute force attack. 3 by 10 to the 15 attempts. So that's our basic brute force attack to find a password. That'll work, but it will take a long time because it depends upon how long it takes to calculate a hash. How long does it take? Let's say
how many hash possible hash value is not
it's 3. The total possible passwords are 36 to the power of 10, which is about 3 by 10 to the 15.
possible hash value is
Yes, you're right. Depends upon our length of our hash value, our hash. Yep. If we have a 28-bit hash, we have 2 to the power of 10, 2 to the power of 128. If we have a 28-bit hash value, we have 2 to the power of 128 hash values. Is it larger than 3 by 10 to the 15? Is it larger? Which one's bigger? I think 2 to the power of 128 is larger.
Yeah.
Much larger. Okay.
Bigger than
2 to the power of 2 to the power of 50 is about 10 to the power of 15. So 2 to the power of 128 is much larger than our set of passwords. So the brute force attack, try all passwords, calculate the hash. For the given hash value, if it matches this hash value, we've found the password for this user. Let's say that to calculate a hash, it takes some time, and to give us some number, let's say we can do 10 to the power of 7 hashes per second. That's how fast my computer can calculate a hash. In fact, in most, well, it'd be slower than that, but let's use this number. So we have 3 by 10 to the power of 15 hashes to calculate in this brute force attack. That's the worst case. On average, we'd find one before that, but the worst case. So how many seconds? 3 by 10 to the 8. Is that right? Seconds. That is 10 to the power of 7 hashes per second. 3 by 10 to the 15 hashes to calculate gives us 3 by 10 to the 8 seconds to do all of those calculations. Which turns out to be about 10 years. Okay? You've just got access to some database. You're a malicious user. You spent a lot of effort to find access to this database. Now your aim is to find the password of one user. It takes you 10 years to find that password. So our brute force attack in this case is not very effective, because if I find someone's password 10 years from now, most likely they've changed the password and no longer using it on where we think they are. So that's where a brute force attack in this example is not very effective, because it would take too long to find a password. I would like to find a password of another user within a matter of minutes, hours, days. If I'm a lazy attacker, that is, I just want to get your password to access your Hotmail account so I can send fake messages to your friends and make you look bad, then I don't want to go to much effort to find that. How can we make this faster? Let's say this is using one computer, 100 computers. I can get access to many different computers. Maybe I use the labs and calculate the hashes distributed across a set of computers. Well, 100 computers we speed up by a factor of 100. So instead of 10 years, we're down to approximately 1 month. A bit larger than a month. 10 computers would be 1 year. 100 computers would be 1/10 of the year, which is about 1 month. Still, I don't want to wait for 1 month to find your password. Can we do it faster? On the front of your handouts, yes. Use a manual approach. Threaten the person. Okay. Add more computers. Okay. What about another approach? And a common approach is to use a set of pre-calculated passwords. Let's say, okay, so 1 month's not so bad. So store this set of hash values in some database or in some table. Let's say someone else has calculated this over 1 month. They have used 100 computers. In fact, usually you cannot calculate this fast in practice, but they've spent the effort of 1,000 computers. They've collected all the results and stored them in some table. You go and pay them for that table and simply use the answers. That is, let's store these values in a table, some lookup table. That is, we have Pn, I won't write 3 by 10 to the store those passwords and hash values in a table. So in a large text file, a large database. We'll see how large in a moment. And now, if that's pre-computed, we'd say this is pre-computed. That is, someone has done it for us, or it's been done in the past. If I have this table available, how long does it take me to find your password? Now, the challenge is, given this table, and given someone's hash value, just look up the table. That is, look in this index, find a matching hash value, and then you've found the password. Looking up a table, searching for some value, is much faster than calculating hashes. Applying a hash algorithm takes time. And doing a simple lookup in a table is much faster than applying a hash algorithm. So if we already have this table available, someone else has done the hard work for us, then what the attacker can do is just apply some lookup on the table. And let's say, and I'll show you an example in a moment, but let's take a value from an example where if we can look up in the table at a speed of 10 to the power of 12 per second. That is, I've got a hash value, HA, I want to find the password. I just scan through the table until I find a match in this column, and then I've found the password. If we can scan through the table at a speed of 10 to the power of 12 per second, then how long does it take us? Three by 10 to the power of 3 seconds. So if we have this set of hash values pre-calculated, then from the malicious user's perspective, if they have this table available, someone else has calculated it for them in the past, then they can quickly find the password. 3,000 seconds, less than 1 hour. That's more practical. Now, if I have this table available and I get access to the database of hash values, it takes me 1 hour to find all the passwords. That's feasible.
This table is keep secret.
No. The table is something that someone else has, or you may have calculated in the past. Maybe you spent 10 years calculating it on your computer, or maybe more reasonable, some other organisation has got access to 100 computers and spent several months to calculate it. Okay, this speed is slightly higher than normal. So we still need to do this, but once we do this once, we can reuse the table for different sets of passwords. So once we have this table stored, then it's easy to do a lookup, or fast to do a lookup. Much faster than calculating the hash. You can go to websites and pay money and download these tables. Okay? So the practice is that, or download this information. The practice is that, okay, someone else has pre-calculated these hash values, pre-computed them, store them in a table, and now the malicious user just has the task of getting the table and doing a lookup. Performing a lookup is much faster than performing the hash itself.
The table is as long.
The table is as long as this.
Okay.
So this step was still needed, but we only need it once because the passwords do not change. The set of passwords is always a set of 10-character passwords in this case. What about the algorithm for the algorithm that we use for the hash function really impacts upon the speed at which we calculate here. Okay, so yes, if we need one table per hash algorithm. If someone uses a different hash algorithm, then we need a different table, correct. In the past, many Unix systems and even in Windows systems, they use one hash algorithm. In fact, Windows use different than Unix, but over a period of 5 or 10 years, they use the same hash algorithm. So it was just a matter of someone pre-computing these tables, taking some time and effort, once the tables are available, anyone can make use of them and quickly find a password from the hash value.
And this concern that the password have fixed 10 characters.
In this example, it's 10 characters. If you make it larger, then this increases and the lookup time increases, and importantly, the size of the table increases. How big is our table here? We have 3 times 10 to the power of 15 entries. That is, we have to store a password and a hash value. How big is our password? 10 characters, so 10 bytes, say. And how big is a hash value? Let's say we're using MD5. MD5 is 128-bit hash value. 128 bits is what? 16 bytes. That is, every password is 10 bytes in length, every hash value is 16 bytes in length. So, I've done the calculation before. 160 bytes times 3 by 10 to the 15. Yeah. Sorry. That's plus 10 plus 16. So we have to store 26 bytes per entry. And 3 by 10 to the 15 entries. $78,000 terabytes. How many hard disks? Okay, not feasible to store.
Where 10 bytes come from?
10 bytes is the length of your password. 10 characters, let's say 1 character per byte. And 16 bytes comes from the length of the hash value, 128-bit hash value. Store 26 bytes per entry, 3 by 10 to the 15 entries. It's about 78,000 terabytes. Too large to store. That's the problem with this approach, but there are better data structures for storing this. And one data structure for how to store the passwords and the hash values in a much more efficient manner is called rainbow tables. It's basically how to store this. Instead of having to store every password and hash value, there's some relationship between them that you don't have to store all the values. Meaning you can have the same information effectively, make the lookup fast, but you don't have to store so much. And the example, and I got it from a website. A website that sells these tables. How ethical it is a question. It has 2 different sets of tables. The LM and NTLM are for hashes used by Windows. And in Unix, or at least the old Unix hashes of passwords used MD5. So let's just look at MD5, the example I've used here. I've used this example. Our password is lowercase alphabetical characters and numeric characters. That is A to Z and 0 to 9. 36 possible characters. Password length up to 10 characters. So up to 10 characters. The key space is about, what did we get? 3 by 10 to the 15. That's this number, all right? 3 by, there should be 15 digits after the 3. So the key space, the number of possible passwords is 3 by 10 to the 15. We calculated to store that in the basic form would take 78,000 terabytes. Using rainbow tables, it effectively compresses. That is, we don't have to store so much information to get the same information out when we do a lookup. 400 gigabytes. That's reasonable. All right, it's a large file or a large set of files, but fits on a standard disk, hard disk, as opposed to 78,000 hard disks. So by using better data structures to store this, we can bring this down to a reasonable size. Now, I've looked at the basics of it, but it's something to do with you can relate the hash of one value and the hash of the next password. If it differs by a little bit, you can store them in a chain. I cannot explain it because I don't know it enough to be able to explain that exact structure of the rainbow tables. Yeah.
This is like one hash value have a group of many passwords.
No, it's not about collisions because there are many more hash values than passwords in this case. We have many more hash values than there are passwords. So we shouldn't have collisions. We may have in several, but not many in practice. It's just the way that you can relate a sequence of hash values and passwords together to, instead of storing the whole set, store the initial one and something about the differences. These are different structures of passwords here. I'm just focusing on this last column, last row. So the end result is that now the malicious user goes and downloads, or in fact in this case pays for a hard disk which has this 400 gigabyte of data on it, this table. It has this information in it, and now they do a lookup, and the lookup, where did I get the number of 10 to the power of 12 lookups per second? There's something about performance here. Here's a plot of performance for someone did this on some computer using a graphics card. Look at the green line. That's using the graphics card to do the lookup, to speed up the lookup. And the average values are in the order of hundreds of seconds, up to 2,000 seconds. It will change depending on what the hash value is. These are just random hash values. So in the order of hundreds or maybe thousands of seconds to do a search through that table. That's where I got this number from, about in the order of thousands of seconds, which is less than 1 hour. It's just an example of performance. So it's possible to find someone's password from the hash value using this approach, so long as the password is within some range. So long as we have this pre-calculated set of values, then it's feasible for an attacker to find the password. Why do we say all this? To motivate the reason for assault. Using assault defeats such an attack. Because using assault, we have not just the hash of the password, but a hash of some random number. Let's say we have a 10-bit random number. We have 1,000 possible random numbers in our salt. So now, instead of just hashing one password, if we were to pre-compute, we'd have to hash the password and salt 1, store the value, the password and salt 2, store the value, and the password with salt 1,000 and store the value. If we were to do this pre-computation step, because we don't know in advance what salt value the user has. So to pre-compute all the possible hashes, we need to compute for all the possible passwords and all the possible salt values. If we had a 10-bit salt value, For every password, for P1, we'd need to pre-compute the hash with salt 1, the hash with salt 2, the hash with salt 3, up to the hash with salt 1024 with a 10-bit salt value. And then with password 2, we'd need to compute 1024 hashes. Effectively, we increase the size of this table by 1,000. With a 10-bit salt value, we need 1024 times larger values stored. That is, make this table 1024 times larger, which was in our previous, from the website, if I can, from the website, our size was about 400 gigabytes, now 1,000 times larger, 400 terabytes. Okay, 400 terabytes, not something you can store on a single disk. Possible if you have hundreds of disks. Let's make a salt, instead of 10 bits, 20 bits. It's now 1 million times larger. So we need 400,000 terabytes to store that. So by using a salt, if the attacker is to use this pre-computation approach, it makes the size at which we need to store too large to be feasible. That is, it makes it this large again. So that's the main benefit of a salt, and that's why salts are used with storage of passwords nowadays. Without a salt, it's feasible to use some pre-computed set of hash values and look up quickly the password. With a salt, pre-computing the passwords results in a table which is too large to store nowadays, and also increases the lookup time by a factor of 1,000 or 1,000,000. So increase this lookup time from 1 hour to 1,000 hours, and we're starting to be not very practical again for the typical purpose.
Normally, how can we store the salt in the way that the attacker cannot see?
So the attacker still knows the salt, but note that this step, and this is important here, this step is performed once for all possible passwords without knowledge of what the hash values are in the database. Let's go back to our website, our slides. Here's our database of usernames and passwords, or hash of passwords and salt values. That's stored on on your web database, on my computer system, on the IT server, for example. The calculation of this table is done beforehand, before the malicious user knows of this information. That is, someone has done it last year, for example. They make this table available. If they want to include a salt value, then they would need to consider all possible salt values, because they don't know in advance what salt value is in the database for the passwords, for the hashed passwords. So if we were to do a lookup on a pre-computed table of hash values, then that pre-computed table of hash values must be calculated for all possible salt values. Even though I only use one salt value, we'd need to pre-compute for all of them to know in advance, because we don't know which one. So even though the malicious user knows the salt value, using this pre-computation of the table is of no benefit. That is, it becomes too large for the table to store all possible values. So using a salt in this case prevents this lookup type attack, this pre-computation of hash tables and a fast lookup to find the password. So long as the salt is random and reasonably long, we see even 20 bits as a salt would be 1,000,000 times, will give us 1,000,000 times more slower to look up and 1,000,000 times larger table, so that should be reasonable. On the Linux operating system, the salt I think is, what is it? I think it may be in the order of 64 bits, it may be even larger than 64 bits, but the salt is much larger than 10 or 20 bits, and therefore storing a set of tables for each salt value is just not feasible anymore. So easy to prevent these attacks using a salt. So the main point there is that the hashes of all possible passwords are pre-computed and stored in some table. When we pre-compute them, yes, it takes some time, but maybe the organisation or the person who pre-computes has access to many computers, so they have some access to fast computers. They do that over a period of 1 year, pre-compute them, and now that table that's being pre-computed can be reused in the future, so long as we're using the same structure of passwords. Anyone could just look up the table and find the hash value. But if we use a salt, we'd need to pre-compute many tables, one for each salt. And that's just too large to store. If we make the salt large enough, it's infeasible to store all the possible tables. That's about all we're going to cover for the Linux type passwords. We need to go back a few slides and cover a few more things. But any questions on this before we move back? So most operating systems now will use a salt. When you create your database for your website, when you go create your own company to make a lot of money, you should take a hash of the password and store it in the database where the password is in fact also combined with a salt, a reasonable length salt.
Can we put the salt in any, in the front, on front of, or
Yep.
in the back, or in the middle?
It doesn't matter as long as it's, do we add the salt to the end, to the start? It doesn't matter. As long as it's known where it is. If it's in the middle, as long as you know it's after the 20th bit of the password. So that because remember when someone logs in, they supply their password. So you supply your password to the system takes the stored salt value and your supplied password, they combine them, take a hash of that value, get some hash value, compare it to the hashed password in the system. If they match, you're accepted. If not, you're rejected. So you need to know what the salt value is and how it's combined with the password and what hash algorithm you use.
The system have to know beforehand.
Yes, must know in the design of the system. And as the question before, what if we use a different hash algorithm? Then we need a different table if we're going to use this attack approach. And this website lists tables for MD5 and for other hash algorithms which were used in Windows, LM and NTLM. $1,000 to download that, to access that, $1,000 US to access that 400 gigabyte file. They'll send it to you on a hard drive. So they've got a business of they do all this computation and then charge you to access the table. Maybe you'll find it for free somewhere. I'm sure. Because in the past at least, not so much in current operating systems, but in the past if someone used MD5, no salt value, it's easy to find the password. So for example, some website has a database of 100,000 users, a popular website, 100,000 users stored in the database. They have hashed the passwords, but they have not used a salt. They've used MD5. So some malicious user gets access to this database through some other exploit, gets the database of all the users and their hash passwords. They use this table and they immediately, or within a small amount of time, can find the corresponding passwords for many of those 100,000 users and therefore use that for other malicious purposes. So use a salt and use a strong hash algorithm. SHA is considered stronger than MD5 now. Of course, we're teaching you this not so that you can break passwords, but so you can design your systems to be strong against malicious users. That's important. Okay, let's move back and see what we've skipped about passwords. Because we finished with that example on the Linux password last week. We said that, okay, we use passwords, we know how they're used. What is a good password? How do we store them? We've seen how we've stored them. What is a good password? One that cannot be guessed. We will not cover that in any depth here. You can think about that. There's some good resources online. There's some links from the website that talk about how to choose a password. But basically it's a trade-off between security and usability. That is, you want a password that someone cannot guess, but you want a password that you can remember. So you need to trade off there. We've talked about how to submit a password when you log in, for example. Let's see a few other things regarding passwords. Online password guessing. What we just talked about we could think of as offline password guessing. Malicious user gets access to all the hash values. Then in their own time, on their own computer system, they try to find the passwords, try to guess the passwords. So that's offline password guessing. Online password system is when the malicious user goes to the website, enters in some username and guesses a password, presses enter, and they get a response, you're accepted, therefore I've guessed the password, or you're not, and try another password and another password. That's harder because in an online password guessing, the malicious user doesn't have access to their own computer or computers to do a brute force attack, and we can have other ways to make it harder for the attacker. The attacker only has a limited time, usually. They don't have as much compute power and as much time as possible. And the guesses can be recorded and tracked. So with online password guessing, if I attempt a password and it's wrong, the system can record that. It could record your IP address and use some other techniques to try to prevent future attacks. In online password guessing, the security depends upon the number of incorrect guesses allowed and the consequence of too many incorrect guesses. Think about the ATM where you get money out of. You put your card in, you type in your PIN, 4-digit value, it's only small. You get it wrong, so let's say you're a malicious user, you guess someone else's PIN, you get it wrong. You try again, you get it wrong. You try it the third time, you get it wrong. The machine doesn't let you try again, it takes your card. So in that case, you get 3 attempts, for example. After that, the ATM swallows the card. You cannot get it back until you go to the bank. And then, therefore, the attacker cannot make more guesses. So there's how we can make this strong against password guessing by limiting the number of incorrect guesses. And there are other ways as well. Also, the consequence of an incorrect guess is important. And that was one example. The consequence was you lose the ATM card. Imagine the military, the army, they have a base in some foreign country at war, and the personnel, every day they go out, leave the base and do whatever they need to do. When they come back at night, they need to say the password to get into the base, okay? And the password changes every day. So in the morning they tell you, here's the password. You go, fight, whatever. Come back at night and say, here's the password, I want to enter the base. Let's say the consequence is if you guess the wrong password, they shoot you. Okay? How many guesses are you going to try? Well, 1, are you going to guess? The consequence is you die if you get it wrong. You get in if you pass, if you get it right. So here, the consequence has an impact upon how many guesses a malicious user is going to take. So making the consequences high of getting it wrong means that it's unlikely that malicious user will make those guesses. Okay. Now that's an extreme example. So, how do we make our system more secure against online password guesses? Lock the system if there are too many guesses. You make 10 attempts to log into the IT server. You use the wrong password 10 times. You can no longer make an attempt. So the system logs who is making an attempt, and after many attempts, they lock you out. So that improves the security. What's the problem? What's the problem with that approach?
For too many guests.
The user cannot access when they want to.
Okay, if the user mistakenly gets their password wrong, let's say that you get 2 attempts to log into your Facebook account. And you first time you type it in and you just hit the wrong key. Wrong. You try the second time, same mistake, hit the wrong key. You're locked out of your Facebook account. So there, the problem is it's inconvenient for the normal users. It's secure, it adds security, but if the normal user forgets their password or types it in wrong, they may be locked out of their account. And that's inconvenient for the normal users. Also, let's try a denial of service attack. I don't want you to access some account, so I just make several random attempts in your username on the account, and eventually it locks you out of the account. So that can lock other users out of the account. So the malicious user can do a denial of service attack. But it adds security. Limit the speed at which guesses can be made. On most operating systems, when you type in your password to log in and you press enter, and if it's wrong, it doesn't immediately let you have another guess. It adds, say, a 1-second delay. 1 second, you don't notice that much. It's not so inconvenient. But a 1-second delay means that if you can automate the script to attempt passwords, it will take you 1 second per attempt. So by limiting the speed at which you can make guesses, it makes brute force attacks harder. If the speed wasn't limited, I could try to log into the IT server. I could write a script that sends requests to try to log in such that I can send, let's say, 1,000 attempts per second. But if it limits 1 attempt per second, then I can only make 1 attempt per second on 1,000 times slower. So by limiting the speed at which guesses can be made, we prevent or add more security to the system. Try to find the attacker, record who is making the guesses, record their IP address, record their username, and at a later stage try and do something about them. If I find that your username is trying to access, or the IP address of your computer is trying to log in as someone else, then I can log your IP address, come and find you and tell you to stop doing that or to take some other action to prevent you from doing it in the future. And the last thing is to make passwords harder to guess. That is, make the users choose passwords which are hard for an attacker to guess. Don't let them choose the word password as their password. Don't let them to choose their name as their password. So have certain conditions on the structure of the password that the user is allowed to choose. That makes attempts harder, but it makes it more inconvenient for the user. So again, in these, we've got a trade-off in terms of security. We've got ways to make it more secure, but the disadvantages are that it becomes more inconvenient for the user, the normal user. How do we measure the strength of a password? Think about it from a brute force attack. How many attempts do you need to guess the password? In this example, we had a 10-character password. We have 36 possible characters to choose from. or 36 possible letters from the alphabet to choose from for each character in the password. So we get 36 to the power of 10 possible passwords, which is 3 by 10 to the 15. So a brute force attack, we need to make that many guesses, or the worst case, that many guesses to find the password. 3 by 10 to the 15 is, do I have a calculator? In base 2, is about about 2 to the power of 50. So this password, which allows 10 characters, that is, if you choose a password of 10 characters, it must be 10 characters in length, you can choose from this set. There are 36 to the power of 10 possible passwords. A worst case brute force attack would take 36 to the power of 10 attempts, which is about 2 to the power of 50 attempts. Comparing it to encryption, we could say that this is equivalent strength to about a 50-bit key. We can talk about DES had a 64-bit, in fact 56-bit key effectively. So DES, we knew that a brute force attack on 56 bits was possible. AES uses a 128-bit key, for example. 128, 2 to the power of 128 attempts is going to take too long in practice. So sometimes when we talk about passwords, convert it into a binary value. That is how many attempts it would take, and then what's the equivalent length as a binary value to think about the strength is a common way to talk about the strength of passwords. And we can think of that as really using entropy as an indicator of the password strength. A password with entropy of n bits is equivalent to an n-bit key at withstanding a brute force attack. In other words, this password, 10 characters from the set A to Z and 0 to 9, has an entropy of about 50 because the number of attempts it would take to do a brute force attack is about 2 to the power of 50. So it's equivalent to about a 50-bit key if it's a random key. So just a way to relate passwords, which are not normally binary but are characters, English characters or so on, back to something we can compare about binary values. So different character sets have different levels of entropy. The more you've got to choose from, the larger the entropy. If we can choose from the digits, one value, we've got choice between 10 different digits, 0 to 9, then the entropy of each digit is 3.32. Where does that come from? We'd need 3.32 bits to represent one of those digits. Why 3.32? 2 to the power of 3.32. Yeah. Log base 2 of 10 is 3.32. So, in simple terms, you get to choose a password, one character password, choose from the digits 0 to 9. You've got 10 different choices. So how many bits do we need to represent those different choices? Well, in base 2 of log of 10 is 3.32. That is, we'd need 3.32 bits to represent one of those 10 values. An English character, one of the lowercase English characters, 26 possible values. Each character has an entropy of 4.7. Approximately 4.70. Because the log in base 2 of 26 is 4.7. How do we use this? Well, we want to choose a password which has large entropy. So we can design password schemes. That is, the user must choose a password from the set of English characters or from the set of English characters combined with digits, so that we give a password scheme such that the aim is that the password that they choose will have large entropy. Large entropy means that it's harder or take longer to do a brute force attack. So we're just talking about different sets of characters and their entropy. If you get to choose from the set of ASCII characters that are printable, in ASCII, if you remember, there are 128 different characters, but some of them are characters that cannot be printed on the screen, like delete, the bell, and different control characters. So that leaves 94 ASCII printable characters. That is the letters, the numbers, exclamation mark, comma, and all those other characters that can be printed. If you get to choose from them, then you have 94 to choose from. Choose your password, then one character gives an entropy of about 6.55. So what password scheme gives us a security which is equivalent strength of, say, as an example, a 64-bit key? That is, option 1 or scheme 1. You are the designer of the database. You force the users to choose a password according to your scheme. That is, you set some criteria. The users must choose a password according to how you specify. Option 1 or scheme 1 is, let's say the password must be 64 characters in length. And each character, the character set, 0 and 1. That is, it must be a binary password. Okay, there's the first scheme. You get to choose between 0 and 1, and you must choose 64 characters. So, assuming the user chooses random, then we have 64-bit length password. A brute force attack. How many possible passwords in this case?
2 over 64.
There are 2 to the power of 64 possible passwords. If we have 64 bits, we have 2 to the power of 64 possible values. So two to the power of 64 possible values. What's the entropy? 64. That is, this password scheme to break using brute force is equivalent to breaking a 64-bit key, because it is a 64-bit key. Okay, another scheme. We can choose from just the digits. That is 0 to 9. If you want to have the same strength as this, that is, we want an entropy of 64. So it's the same strength as our previous scheme. Therefore, we need 2 to the power of 64 possible passwords. How long should the password be? You get to choose from 0 to 9 as the digits. How many characters should it be such that we get 2 to the power of 64 possible passwords? That's the question here. And luckily you have the answer in front of you. About 20. Why? Why is it 20? What's the entropy of one digit? If you get to choose just one digit between 0 and 9, the entropy of one digit is 3.32. That is, you need 3.32 bits to represent that one digit. If you get to choose two digits, what's the entropy? You need 6.64 bits to represent that. If you get to, so to get an entropy of 64, 64 divided by 3.32 is about 20. 20 digits, a password which must be 20 digits in length, gives us what do we get? Yep. Have I done this wrong? $20 digits, 0 to 9. 10 to the power of 20. Yeah, 10 to the power of 20 attempts. That is, you can choose from 10. You need to choose 20 different characters. There's 10 to the power of 20 possible passwords using this scheme, which is approximately 2 to the power of 64. Not the same, but very close. That's all. That is, the total number of passwords. The total number of passwords using this scheme is the same as the total number of passwords using scheme 1, which is about 2 to the power of 64, which means they both have an entropy of about 64, which means they're both equivalent strength against a brute force attack. That's all we're trying to work out, how to compare different password schemes. If you get to choose from not the digits but the English letters from one of 26 possible characters, then it turns out the length needs to be 14, because the entropy of one letter is 4.7. We want an entropy of 64. 64 divided by 4.7 is 14 approximately. So scheme 3 would be, if you get to choose from the English letters, you need a password length of 14 characters to give the same strength as the previous two schemes. And the other one, if you choose from one of the 94 possible printable ASCII characters, you need about 10 letters in your password. So we can now compare different password schemes by converting them back to basically how many attempts it takes in a brute force attack. And a simple way to look at that is the entropy. That's assuming the passwords are chosen random. Who chooses a random password when they choose a password for their account? No one. Humans choose passwords which are not random. So that was the best case analysis. In reality, it's difficult to estimate what the entropy of a particular password or password scheme will be, although some organisations have done some studies and approximations. NIST is an organisation that creates standards in the US, and the next slide is from their study about passwords. Maybe a bit old, but it gives a good indication of different passwords. Let's explain it. What have we got? On the first column is the password length, okay, the number of characters we're allowed. The last column here is if our password is chosen from any of those 94 printable ASCII characters, and it's randomly chosen, that is the two white columns here. If they're randomly chosen, then the entropy of a is shown in the values in this column. That is, a 10-character randomly chosen character, a randomly chosen password where the characters are chosen from the 94 printable ASCII characters gives an entropy of 66, which is about what we got here. We wanted a 64-bit equivalent strength. If we choose 10 random printable ASCII characters, we get an entropy of actually 66, which is strong enough or equivalent to our 64-bit password scheme. That's if we choose random. And the second to last column is if we choose a random password of some length, choosing from just 10 characters, choosing from the digits. We need a 20-character length password to get equivalent strength of around 64, in this case 66 bit entropy. So that's how we read those two columns. They're in the cases of random passwords. But you don't choose random passwords. How do you choose a password?
Something you can remember.
Something you can remember, and therefore maybe a word or some combination of letters which is not random, that has some structure. Here's some examples using 3 different schemes. So it's the first scheme, no checks, is that, and it's based on some studies that they've done, that if the user can choose a password from the set of 94 characters, they can choose a password, and then they did some studies and found out the equivalent strength. Now, if you choose a password and the first letter starts with the letter Q, what's the next letter likely to be? It's likely to be U. That is, it's unlikely to be T. Possible, but most users are not going to choose a password, if we think about English, that starts with the letter Q followed by T. Some may, but most will not. So there's some structure that users will choose based upon the language. So if you choose a password which starts with some letter, the next letter, the probability of the next letter being some value can be estimated. And that's where these results have come from. What it turns out, if the user can choose any password from the set of 94 characters, if they choose a password of 10 characters in length, the entropy is 21 bits. If the user chooses a 10-character password and the password is randomly chosen, the entropy is 66 bits. It's much stronger if you randomly choose it. If you allow the user to choose their own password, then from their studies is entropy about 21 bits. Much weaker. To get equivalent to this 64-bit password, it's 66, but about 64 bits, like we did in our example, to get equivalent strength, let's see, what would you need to choose? In fact, it doesn't even get up to 64. If we let the user choose a password, we have no checks on what they choose, we don't provide any other conditions, then they'd need to choose a password larger than 40 characters in length to get equivalent strength to a 64-bit key. Who chooses 40-character passwords? No one. A slightly more secure approach is to put some conditions on how the user chooses a password. Make sure that they do not choose a password from a dictionary. That is, you choose a password, the system checks, is that password in some dictionary? If so, you must choose a different password. If not, it's accepted. If we add this condition, then the strength increases a bit, but not by much. Choose 10-character password with the condition that that word cannot be in the dictionary. The strength is about 26 bits, or an entropy of about 26 bits. Much weaker than the random case. And the second, or the set of conditions, you cannot choose from a dictionary, and they also provide some other rules. I cannot remember what those rules were, but they're in the publication. Some other rules that you cannot choose these types of passwords that combine letters in some way. If there's some extra restrictions, we can increase the strength up to 32-bit entropy, but still nowhere near our random password. So, and this is the case if we allow the user to choose any number as a password. How long is the PIN of your ATM? Usually 4 characters. Strength is about entropy of 9, as if your user gets to choose it. If it's random, entropy of about 13. Okay. When users choose passwords, because they do not choose random passwords, the strength of those passwords is much less than what we need to prevent a brute force attack. And this is just one way to compare the strength of passwords. So just understand at minimum how, given a particular password scheme, that is the length of the password and the set of characters you can choose from, how strong it is, or how to compare the strength of 2 different password schemes. Anyone have a good scheme for choosing a password? Don't tell anyone, keep it for yourself, but make sure it's good. Think in Thai, print it in English, okay. So there are many different recommendations. Again, it's a trade-off between security. I recommend choosing random, but it's inconvenient. So choosing random is not inconvenient. So look on different websites. There's some links on the course website for different ideas there. But I think in most cases you should be able to use your brain and think about ways to choose good passwords, different schemes. One thing is how you reuse passwords, okay? Because now you know passwords are stored in databases, on websites, on the IT server, at the bank and so on. If you reuse the same password for every system you access, if one system becomes compromised and that system didn't take a hash with a salt of your password, they just stored the password in as it is. If that system becomes compromised, a malicious person now has your password for all your services. So using different passwords across different services is recommended. And using password managers, for example, is one way to automate that process. But many different things to consider there. And we've covered offline password guessing with this large example of what an attacker can do if they have this database of hash values, as an example. Any questions on passwords before we move on to the next topic?
What do you recommend for how to choose password?
How to choose? Some recommendations are to use a phrase, a long phrase, and for example take the first letters from each word in that long phrase. So it doesn't of course become a word. I love security and cryptography. You take I, L, S, A, C, the first letters of each word. Instead of using and, A and D, use the ampersand character on the keyboard. So make sure you combine not just letters, but numbers and different characters from the keyboard.
We do steganography on our password.
That makes it harder for someone to guess your password without knowing your scheme. That is, you need to keep that scheme that you use in your head. You can remember the phrase easily normally, because you choose something you can remember, so long as you then remember what scheme you used. Okay, use the first letter of each word, or replace these characters with these other characters. If you can remember that, then you've got an increased chance. Use long passwords is another thing. Don't tell other people your passwords is another thing. Because then they discover your scheme. Whether it's a strong or a weak scheme, they know your approach. But there are other approaches as well. What's the next topic? Any other questions on passwords? Don't try and guess other people's passwords. That's malicious. Use this knowledge to improve the security of systems. Yesterday at the lab, those of you in the lab, I was slightly late because I had a flat tyre on the way to work. A flat tyre. And last night at home, well, someone may be taking care of my car. Last night at home I discovered it was a nail in the tyre, which is okay, that's just bad luck. But it turns out over the last few months I've had that 3 times. So, very bad luck. Someone suggested that maybe someone is doing it to me, putting nails in my car. Maybe a student is doing it to me. And that made me think that, okay, if a student who's getting bad grades or is not enjoying the lecture is doing that to me, then I guess that's inconvenient, something I'll put up with. But the problem is, now that you know about, what do you know about? Encryption, you know about passwords, how they work, their weaknesses, you know about, you're going to know a little bit about viruses, you know about firewalls. If it's one of you that's putting this nail under my tyre, then now after this course you can do much worse to me. You can access my computer, you can access all sorts of things. So let's hope it's not one of you. Okay. I think I do watch a few people in this class. I'm a little bit wary. This person here, he pretends he's sleeping in my lectures, but he's actually listening, and he's trying to work out ways to defeat me. Yeah? Let's spend 15 minutes or so looking at how we manage keys. So, in fact, this was before passwords and user authentication, so we go back a bit. How do we manage the keys that we use in both symmetric key cryptography and asymmetric key cryptography? That is RSA, for example, and in DES, triple DES, and so on. You saw a little bit about it in your homework. You generated keys, you accessed my public key. How did I make that public key available to you?
Website.
I put it on the website. What if someone got access to my website and put their key there and said it was Steve's key? You would have used the wrong key and you would have failed in the homework. Okay, so how do we make sure that the key we're using is appropriate, and how do we distribute those keys? That's important. Or what if, for example, 2 students competing to get the top grade, one of them downloaded my key, and then he told his friends saying, here's the key of Steve you use in the homework, but it was in fact a different key. And that student used this wrong key and got the wrong answer. So if there's some malicious user in the middle, then they may be able to perform some attack to get some result to their benefit. Use cryptographic techniques to enhance that trust. Now, comparing symmetric key cryptography with asymmetric or public key cryptography. For example, AES and triple DES, a symmetric key cryptography. RSA is an example of public key cryptography. What's the difference? Symmetric key cryptography is normally much faster. To encrypt something of the same size, it will take much more time using RSA than using DES or AES. just the way that algorithms work. It's much faster to do symmetric key cryptography. As a result, symmetric key cryptography is usually used when we want to encrypt large amounts of data. I want to send a file to you. Normally you would use symmetric key cryptography, not use RSA. Because public key cryptography is too slow if we want a large amount of data to be encrypted. But the benefit of public key cryptography is that we don't need to share a secret. We have a public and private key. We need to share that public key because we encrypt with the public key of the recipient. With symmetric key cryptography, we need to share a secret key. So that's the basic trade-offs between the two approaches. The question is, how do we share symmetric keys in symmetric key cryptography? And also, how do we distribute public keys in public key cryptography? We saw an example in the homework. I distributed my public key via a website. What are some more secure ways to do it? First, looking at how do we distribute symmetric keys. Two of us want to encrypt some data. We both need the same key, the shared secret key. If I choose the shared secret key, I choose a random value, how do I get it to the other person without the malicious user knowing? So the objective here, two entities need to share some secret key. One of the entities can create that. We need to get it to the other one securely. We'll use symmetric key encryption to do that in this set of examples. One principle we'll see is that we'll want to change keys frequently. It's a good security principle to not use the same key all the time. Similar, do not use the same password all the time. Change your passwords frequently. Because if that, for some reason, that key is discovered and you keep using it, but a malicious user has found your key, then they can decrypt everything from now on when you reuse that key. If you use the same key for 10 years, and after 1 year a malicious user found that key, for the remaining 9 years they can decrypt everything that you send. If you use one key and change it every 1 hour, then if they discover, a malicious user discovers your key, then they can only decrypt what you send for the next 1 hour. Because after that you change the key and then they have the challenge of finding this new key. By changing your keys frequently, you make it harder for the attacker. We'll talk a little bit shortly about how we can use different levels of keys as well. So how do we exchange a secret? Diffie-Hellman was one example. Diffie-Hellman algorithm exchanged a secret. Basic approaches: deliver the key physically. I want to communicate with another user. I choose a random shared secret key. I write it on a piece of paper, go up to that user and give them the piece of paper. Or I send it in the post to the US to deliver to that person. So physical delivery of the key can be considered secure in some cases if we trust the postal system, if we trust our method of delivery. Very inconvenient, especially when you have many users. Second approach, very similar. Use a third party, C. A and B want to share a secret. Some other entity, C, creates that secret, gives the secret to A, and also gives that secret to B. So in that case, I'm the third party, C. Then two users who want to communicate, one of them comes to me and says, I want to communicate with user B. I create the key. I tell user A, here's the secret key. The next day, user B comes and says, I want to communicate with user A, and I give them the same shared secret key. So I use some third party to distribute the key, but still using manual delivery. That can help in managing, if we have many users, have a third party do it on our behalf. But both 1 and 2 use manual delivery or physical delivery of keys. The problem with that is that it's inconvenient. If we'd like to use electronic delivery, use a network to deliver, for example. It's possible to use manual delivery when we have a small number of entities involved, but once we start to have thousands of users, every user has to come to my office to get a key, then I'll be overloaded with people coming to my office to get a key. Approach 3, and this relies on the previous two approaches. If A and B already have a key, how do they already have a key? Using approach 1 or 2. If they already have a key, then we can choose a new key, encrypt that with that key that they already have, and send securely across a network. And we can combine that with approach 2. If A and B already have a secure connection to some third party C, C can securely choose a new key and send to A and B. Of course, 3 and 4 rely on 1 and 2. That is, rely on someone already having a key. How do they already have a key? Using manual or physical delivery. Using a third party is useful when we have large systems, many users. Because rather than the individual users having to negotiate and set up a key between them, they go to a third party who does it on their behalf. And we see that can save in terms of communications overhead in a network, and can save in the number of interactions. Let's see some examples of those. First, let's differentiate, because we want to talk about network encryption and exchanging keys to be used in a communications network, we can distinguish between link level encryption and end-to-end encryption. What I mean by link level encryption, I have a cable from my laptop to this computer. There's one link. I would encrypt on my laptop, decrypt at this computer. But if I want to communicate with, say, my computer in my office, there's a cable from my laptop into the wall that goes to a switch on the 3rd floor. Then there's a cable from that switch that goes to a switch in the other building. And then there's a cable from that switch in the other building that goes to my PC in my office. We have one to the switch. We have 3 links in that case. Me to the first switch to the second switch to my PC. 3 links. If we were to use link level encryption, we need to encrypt and decrypt across each link. That is, I encrypt the data, send to the first switch decrypts using the same shared secret key that my computer used, and then across the second link, that switch encrypts the data again using a different key, sends across the next link, the next switch decrypts and then encrypts again and sends to my PC. We'd use encryption across each link separately. That's link level encryption. Encrypt or decrypt and encrypt at each device in the path. Each link shares a secret key with the endpoints on that link. And if we want encryption across a path, we need all links or all devices in the path to support encryption. That is, in my example, my computer needs to support encryption and the 2 switches need to support encryption in that case. The other approach is end-to-end encryption. I want to communicate with my PC in my office. This laptop encrypts the data, sends it to the first switch sends it to the second switch, sends it to the end computer, the PC. It's then that the PC decrypts the data. We only encrypt and decrypt at the endpoints, not across each link. That means that has an advantage in that we don't have to rely on intermediate network devices. I don't have to trust the switches to encrypt and decrypt. But it has some problems in terms of the number of keys that we need to share. Here's an example network. Some switches, some routers, and some end hosts, A through to J. Maybe let's start with the easiest place. Link level encryption means that, for example, if E wants to send to J, there's a shared secret key between E and the switch too, because E encrypts the data, sends across the link, the switch receives, decrypts using the same shared secret key with E, and then the switch 2 encrypts using a different key and sends to router R1. Router R1 decrypts and encrypts using a different key, sends to switch 4, and we keep going until the data is received by J, and then that decrypts and has the data. That's an example of link level encryption. So we have a shared secret key between E and switch 2. We have a shared secret key between switch 2 and router 1. And in fact, for each link across the path, we have a shared secret key, a separate one. How many keys in total in this network? In the entire network, how many keys need to be distributed? In the network, for anyone to be able to communicate with anyone else, how many keys do we need? Again, 20. We need one shared secret key for each link. If you look at the number of lines, the links in this network, and count them, there are 20. That is, E and the switch share a key. D and the switch share a different key. So we'd need 20 keys in that case. What if we want to use end-to-end encryption? A wants to communicate with F. A encrypts the data, sends it to the switch, the router, the switch 3, router 2, switch 5. F receives the ciphertext, decrypts. For that to work, A and F need to share a secret key. What if we want to allow any host, A through to J, to communicate securely with any other hosts? How many shared secret keys do we need? Try and calculate it. 16, no. 20, no. No. Not so many. The question is, we have 10 hosts, A through to J. We want to use end-to-end encryption such that when A encrypts with one shared secret key and sends to F, F decrypts with that same shared secret key. That is, A and F share one key. If A wants to send to G, A and G share a different key. In total in the network, how many shared keys do we need? Not 10 factorial, that's too many. It's how do we calculate it? It's the number of pairs of hosts we have. 45, I think, is the answer. We have 10 hosts. How many keys must A share with other hosts? There are 10 hosts in total. A must share with 9 other hosts. Okay, A with B, A with C, through to A with J. What about B? How many other hosts? Well, 9 in total, but we've already counted the one that's shared with A. So 8. C, 9 in total, minus the one we've shared with A, because A shares with C, and that B shares with C. 7. Go through for all the hosts, add them up. It's not factorial. Do not multiply those values. Add them up, and that gives you the total number of keys. And it becomes, the general formula is 10 times 10 minus 1 divided by 2. N times n minus 1 over 2. If you have n entities, the number of pairs you have is n times n minus 1 over 2. 45 keys in this case. Link encryption, we needed 20 keys. End-to-end, between hosts, we need 45 keys. More keys. More keys we need to distribute, the harder the process. Increase to not just 10 hosts, 100 hosts. We may have a few more links. Maybe we need in the order of 100 in terms of link encryption. If there were 100 hosts with end-to-end encryption between hosts, 100 times 99 divided by 2, which is almost 5,000, is it? 10,000 divided by 2. If we had 100 hosts and use end-to-end encryption, we'd need about we'd need, 4,450 keys. 100 times 99 divided by 2. If we have a large network with 10,000 users, we need 50 million keys to share. End-to-end encryption, we need more keys than link encryption generally. The more keys to share, the more overhead we have in performing that sharing, the harder it is. Between hosts means that A, when it wants to communicate with F, uses just one shared secret key. What if on host A there are 3 different applications, a voice application, a data transfer application, and a web browsing application? And same on each host, 3 different applications. So we'd need 3 times as many keys because each application would use a separate key, most likely. From the web browser on A to the web server on F, use 1 key. The voice application on A to the voice application on F, use a different key. And the data transfer from A to the data transfer on F, use a 3rd key. If we want to encrypt separately between applications, we need even more keys depending upon the number of applications. So it becomes even more. Link encryption in a network, generally we need less keys, easier to distribute. But the problem with link encryption is that all devices in the path must support it. And we must trust those devices. I want to securely send an exam from my laptop to my PC or my office. If I use end-to-end encryption, I trust my PC, I trust my laptop, and I trust my PC in the office. I encrypt here, decrypt at the PC. If I use link-level encryption, I would need to trust the switches in between the end hosts. Maybe there's some malicious student sitting in the room in the 3rd floor who has plugged their computer into the switch and captures all the packets on there and can intercept my data at the switch as it's been encrypted and decrypted. Then that's not a good security outcome for me if I have to trust those intermediate devices. And of course, much more important in a large network like the internet where you need to trust different internet service providers. We're going to look mainly at end-to-end encryption in most of our examples. But the problem with end-to-end encryption, we need many keys. If A needs to exchange with every other entity, then A needs to exchange a key with 9 others. If there were 1,000 end hosts, A would need to exchange keys with 999 others. And same with the other entities. So with end-to-end encryption, we'll use a central third party called a key distribution center, a KDC, where all of the end users trust the KDC, and we use the KDC to help distribute the keys. And the last thing for today, what we'll introduce is that we'll normally use different types of keys. That is, every user will have a master key, and that master key will be known by the user and the KDC. And then when 2 users want to communicate with each other, they use that master key to encrypt a session key between the KDC and each of the users, where the session key is then used to encrypt the data between the end users. That is, we now have two different types of keys, a master key and a session key. A master key is something that the end users have and share with the KDC. A session key is something that we will use to encrypt our data and continually change that key as we encrypt more data. We'll use it for a particular session. Normally, the master keys could be distributed via physical or manual delivery. The session keys are distributed across the network. We can distribute them securely across the network because we can encrypt the session keys with the master key. In summary, we have our data that we want to be kept secure. We encrypt the data with session keys, where the session keys are known by the end users. And for those end users to know the session keys, we encrypt them using master keys, and the KDC distributes those session keys to the end users, encrypted with the master keys. How do we obtain the master keys? Usually using physical or manual delivery. That is, I go to the KDC and say, here's my master key.